for Mary Dooley and Sandra Peake, and then 2 Chair, we are now live.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and welcome, councillors, to this live streamed meeting of the Grove Scrutiny Committee at Bolsover District Council. This is a public meeting being streamed live to YouTube via the council's website. If for any reason the public can no longer hear or see the meeting over the live stream, we will adjourn the meeting until the connection has been re-established. This meeting is also being recorded. Can the facilitator confirm who is in remote attendance at this meeting?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so today, joining you as Chair, Councillor Wilson, we also have Councillor Tricia Clough, Councillor Tom Kirkham, Councillor Jim Clifton, Councillor David Dixon, and Councillor Derek Adams. In the chamber joining us today, Councillor Chris Kane is a member of the committee, and then we have two portfolio holders joining us today, Councillor Sandra Peake and Councillor Mary Dooley. We also have a number of officers to support the meeting, myself as the clerk for the meeting, the Scrutiny and Elections Officer, Joe Wilson, the Monitoring Officer, Sarah Sternberg, Pam Brown, the Head of Leaders Executive and Partnerships, Jessica Clayton, the Partnership Strategy and Policy Officer, Carl Apps and Tom Evans for the housing strategy, the empty property strategy item in a moment.
Thank you. I will now hand over to the facilitator to explain some of the procedures for the meeting. Donna?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So before we start the meeting, members are reminded of the etiquette that's been circulated to you. All members should have their microphone off during the meeting, unless you wish to speak and you've been called on. Members attending remotely, please leave your cameras on during the meeting. Also, for remote members to request to speak, you can use the chat function to type speak, or you can raise your hand on camera. Likewise, in the chamber, if you can raise your hand, we will call on you, or the chair will call on you to speak during the discussion and debate. When a vote is being taken, this will be by a show of hands. For those attending remotely, please ensure your hand is visible on camera. If any member is disconnected from the meeting, please try to rejoin as quickly as possible. If you are experiencing technical difficulties, please contact one of the support officers assigned to the meeting who was emailed to you earlier on. Hopefully you've made a note of those numbers if you've got a Wi-Fi issue. If you're about to speak, the meeting will wait a few moments for you to rejoin. Chair, I'll hand back to you to start the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now begin the agenda. Item 1, apologies for absence. I've had none.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. So we have had apologies from Councillor Peter Roberts and Councillor James Watson.
Thank you. Can I ask if there are any? Oh, I've done that. Urgent items of business. I have none. Have you any?
No, Chair, there's no urgent business for today.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. As per usual practice, could I ask if there are any declarations to be made for today's meeting?
I've received none in advance, Chair, and I don't see any hands raised from members to make any now.
Thank you. Item 4, starting on page 4 of the agenda pack, we have the minutes from the 9th of September for approval. I'd like to move these as a true and accurate record of the meeting. Could I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Adams. Could I ask for all in favour?
I believe that's unanimous, Chair.
All right, thank you. Item 5, list of key decisions. The link to the most recent list of forthcoming decisions can be found on page 15 of the agenda pack and on the committee software system. Could I ask the scrutiny officer to brief members on the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. Just a short list of items on this occasion that are going forward to the October meeting. There is one item, I believe, listed on the current list of key decisions, which is actually now been deferred to November, which is the proposed structure of the planning policy team. Members will be aware that's currently going through a restructure. There is an item in relation to remedial works at Plesley Vale Business Park on culverts. There's a further item on the business retention scheme. Members will be aware they were briefed on this at a previous meeting, and this is the report going forward in relation to that. And for the November executive meeting, there is a report on the environmental health service review. Again, members will be aware that that service has gone through a slight restructure based on service needs and changes in staff. I don't know if there are any questions, Chair.
Have any members got any questions they'd like to ask?
There's no hands raised at the moment, Chair.
Right, thank you. I would like to move that we note the report. Can I have a seconder, please?
I'll second that, Chair.
Could I ask for all in favour?
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you, everybody, for that. Item 6, update on sustainable community strategy and revised sustainable community strategy and the partnership response to the COVID-19. We will now, do we finish there and then, or do I keep reading?
If you want to read the section below
fine.
that, yeah.
We will now consider the process update on achievements via the Sustainable Community Strategy 06 to 2020, and officers will outline the changes as a result of the new strategy covering 2020 to 2023. Members will recall that a draft of the new strategy was circulated to members back in January this year to enable us to provide comments and observations as part of the strategy refresh. There are copies of today's presentation within your agenda packs, starting on page 16. In addition, as supporting paperwork, members have been provided a copy of the adopted version of the new strategy on page 29 at last year's performance report, starting on page 81. We have the head of the Leaders Executive and Partnerships and the Partnership Strategy and Policy Officer here today to present this result. Pam and Jess, would you like to begin, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for inviting us along to speak about the achievements of the past community strategy, which, as members will recall, was a 15-year strategy back in 2006, which doesn't seem that long ago now, but 15 years has passed. And what we're going to do is talk you through some of the achievements from that strategy, but also as you've been involved in the consultation for the new document, and as the new document also aligns with the newly agreed Bolsover District Council corporate plan, we wanted to highlight some sections of that for you in terms of how that's being taken forward. And obviously this sustainable community strategy is a partnership document which we agree as a council with our external partners, so with all our key statutory partners that are involved in Bolsover Partnership. So the way we're going to do this is Jess is going to talk you through the information on the strategies, and then I'll pick up at the end on the response to COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you.
No worries, mate. All right.
Pam?
Just going to start the presentation for you.
Morning, everyone. It's nice to see everyone, although it's on a screen, but it's still nice to see you all just the same.
Thank you.
Before we run into this, I thought it would be worthwhile us just having a bit of a recap, really, about the strategy, because as Pam said, it has been around for a long time, and it's something that we've become to know and love quite a lot. And we have updated a few times before to Scrutiny, so it's always nice to come back and do it again. But the word sustainable in itself, I thought it was worth just exploring that to begin with. And we could take up the whole session in looking at that, but in terms of the word sustainability for us, we interpret that as a partnership is a way of living which is resilient, viable and enduring, aiming for future generations to live as we do now, however improved, without compromising their quality of life, the environment, the economy and society, and that we all work in harmony and holistically with each other. So I thought it was just worthwhile just reminding ourselves of that, which is why it's called the Sustainable Community Strategy. So what is it? As you can see on screen, just do the next slide, please, Donna. So what you see in front of you is the latest strategy. But obviously this has been around since 2006. So it's a strategy that's there to allow organisations to work together, but more importantly, to work together with the community itself, to work effectively towards a common goal, to improve the quality of life for people within the district. It has an outlined long-term vision that we all work to. All our partners and stakeholders work towards a common vision. And just to remind ourselves of what that is, it's a district which is diverse, healthy, fair and prosperous, building on the strengths of our industrial past to become a vibrant and thriving community, capable of meeting the challenges and opportunities of the future. I thought it was worthwhile just mentioning that, particularly in the times that we're in now. So it's the key driver for Bolsover Partnership. It's a key strategy for all our partners to work to and organisations to become involved in. There's 4 sectors that's representative throughout the partnership: the public, private, community and voluntary. The whole aim is that it's inclusive for everybody. Thematic action groups agree priorities that we all work to, and that's refreshed regularly. And the Bolsover District Council's corporate aim is we contribute towards the corporate aims, and all service areas contribute towards the priorities within it, and it encourages cross-sector working. And I believe the latest version has been circulated for you all to look through. So can I have the next slide, please, Donna? So this is the structure, and this is more about who delivers it. So Bolsover Partnership coordinate the delivery of local services, bringing together all the sectors that I referred to earlier: the public, private, voluntary and community. It's these sectors, by working together, enable the aims and actions of this strategy to be achieved. Amalgamating service providers and agencies within the Bolsover area in an effort to drive local regeneration and service improvement. The constitutional structure of the partnership are reviewed regularly, as I referred to earlier, and when necessary, and annually at the RAGM. So the document that was on screen and that you've had sight of is a collection of our annual partnership activities, and together with the biannual report, which I believe you've had sight of as well. You'll see they're both quite lengthy documents, because there's a lot that goes on. And both these are reported to Executive Board and Council Executive on a regular basis. And the Cabinet member who was here today, Mary Dooley, is the portfolio holder for that. So this here is the structure of the partnership and how we work. And the thematic action groups are highlighted on screen. They're in blue. And the Executive Board, you can see, is highlighted in yellow. And the Executive Board function really is there to maintain the strategic vision for the strategy, and are responsible for the overall governance and delivery. But the thematic action groups is the engine room really, in terms of the projects and programmes that's delivered on the ground within the community. And also where there's any gaps or where services need shaping or improving, they put ideas forward towards the commissioning group, which then partners look at how we can change and improve services and develop new ones. And we'll come on to that in a little while. So in terms of the difference that we've made, as you can see, the documents are lengthy. So I don't think it'd be best use of anybody's time to go through them in lots of detail. So we've just pulled out some headlines really of what's been achieved. And this is looking at not just over the last few years, but looking at from 2006. So there is lots of examples, but to pull out one of the first ones, it was we contribute better to our environment quite significantly. And there's been great shifts in one thing that was major a few years ago was the levels of unacceptable litter. So just to give you a flavour of the difference that we've made is that in 2006, we were just recycling 14% of our waste. Now that's over 40% and growing. So quite a significant achievement there, which all partners have obviously been involved in. We're better now at sharing our heritage than we were in our culture. Some of us might be familiar with the programmes of like Limestone Journeys, First Art, which has been significant and helped put Bolsover on the map internationally, and the Olympic legacy. You know, it's gone quite quickly, but you know, it was quite significant to have the Olympic torch running through the district. But partners were very keen for that not just to be a one-off event, and there's been a legacy of sporting activities that have continued as a result of that. One of the significant things is we've got more people in employment, particularly over the last few years. We've consistently been better than the East Midlands and England average, including a 7% job growth between 2012 and 2017. And one thing a few years ago that we were really proud of is although unemployment nationally was quite high, Bolsover actually booked the trend in terms of employment growth and jobs. And that was a result of partners working together and obviously us being inclusive with businesses to take advantage of opportunities that's there and putting our residents and communities in touch with opportunities that were arising. We've been closing the gaps in health inequality, where public health indicators that we use to track this show that we're shifting more closer to national averages. And in fact, we were invited a few years ago to go and talk nationally about the achievements we were making. And the chair presented at a national conference in London, which shared the impacts that we were having and the best practice that Bolsover Partnership were showing in terms of the difference we can make in public health. We've closed the gap in deprivation. In the early 2000s, Bolsover was one of the most deprived, not the most, but one of the most deprived areas nationally. And obviously with that attracted national funding and various things, right from SRB, NRF, that's single regeneration budget funding, neighbourhood renewal funding, working neighbourhood renewal fund, working neighbourhoods fund, etc. So a lot of work's gone on within the district to address that. And in the year 2000, we was around the 20th most deprived areas nationally, which is significant. But now, as of 2019, the latest IMD rates, that's the Index of Multiple Deprivation, we're now the 84th. So that's a significant shift. And obviously the documents over the years have shown all the different workings that we've done, the programs we've delivered to help make that happen. And in 2015, Bolsover was identified as one of the areas showing the biggest improvement in the IMD rates as well. So that's something, you know, that something for us to take away and be proud of. And just to finish off in terms of the headlines that we've achieved is we're now a better housing stock. Now, it's not that long ago that our private housing stock in particular, was deemed not decent. And you know, we all deserve somewhere safe, warm, and dry and to live. So yeah, back in 2003, I think it was about 40% of the housing stock was deemed not decent, and just under half of that was local authority housing. So back in 2010, obviously the local authority and partners worked quite hard and met the decent home standard. So these are, you know, I wanted to give you a flavour of the historical achievements and milestones that we've achieved together as a partnership. So can we just go on to the next slide, please? So what's the plan now? Obviously you can see we've refreshed the document, and this is, you know, something that we're not unfamiliar with. We do review and refresh things regularly, as I referred to earlier. So what we've got here, these are the 4 key strategic themes, and you've seen those on the structure as well. So they are the safer and better community theme, getting better all the time, a better place to live, and a better place to learn, thrive and work. So we're going to utilise these to continue as we have to deliver the long-term vision that I referred to earlier. And the plans and the priorities have been identified in the SCS document, which you can look at your leisure. You'll see the document time frame, it's 2020 to 2023. And this is so that it aligns with the corporate plan, as I referred to earlier. So can we just do the next slide, please? So it's there's 5 thematic action groups that will be delivering projects and working together to achieve the priorities that we've set out. And that's the community safety, health and well-being, low carbon, housing and environment, culture and tourism, and skills and employment. So can we go to the next slide? And working alongside and with those groups will be the associated groups and sectors. So that's likes of parish and town councils, young people, old people, community and voluntary sectors, and the LEPs, the local enterprise partnerships. So can I have the next slide, please? So commissioning, I referred to this earlier on. Obviously, a lot of the partners do like to commission where there's gaps and needs identified, and people delivering the day-to-day jobs. So how this works is that action groups agree ideas and projects using the agreed sustainable community strategy priorities for their theme to put forward programs and agree jointly a focus. And to do that, we use evidence of needs to support what we want to do. And that's not just we don't just look at that in one way. We look at it using statistical data, anecdotal information, and community feedback. Because to have the whole picture is much better than just utilising one to when you're developing a programme. They always consider future sustainability. When we do start something new, we aim for it to continue and have a legacy beyond funding and to help us go prosper into the future. And the programs put forward to the commissioning group for consideration, and successful projects are recommended to executive board for ratification. So next slide, please. So when we do all of this, we like to know that we're achieving and that we're doing a good job. So that links us into the performance monitoring. So it's essential to ensure that the activities have an impact, and we have different ways in which we measure that. We always have an opportunity to have an early notification if things aren't going to plan, and we're not scared to adapt or change things and hold our hands up if we think, well, didn't get that quite right and we need to readjust. In some cases, the funds can be redirected to other projects if things aren't working out. We capture data from the projects and programs. We also capture outcomes. And one thing that we've recently started doing is capturing the social return on investment and doing a calculation to show the pound for pound return that we get for the money that we're spending. So as a result of all that, just to remind ourselves of the achievements, is that that's helped us get more people into work. We're getting healthier, less deprived, and the economy is growing. Next slide, please. So just an example of some projects, and I'm sure you'll be familiar with some of these. One's the Raising Aspirations. And we pop that on there because obviously this is working with young people in the district, the secondary schools and so on. And this was as an example of where an idea comes from the thematic groups, we develop it up work it up as a programme. And this is now not just a Bolsover thing, this has gone out across the county. And the partnership team are responsible for, commissioning and managing that across the whole county. So something that can start off quite small has grown significant. And that's an example of how we look at things in a sustainable way. The one is Bolsover Wellness that I'm sure we're all familiar with. The iVenture and Namibia Bound. This is the you know, the international trip that young people go on, working together for older people, and the Extreme Sports Academy. So just to kind of finish off on that, really, is obviously all that's been successful and it's all good stuff. But obviously the times at the moment that we're in, we're not quite sure in terms of what's going to happen, and the impacts that we've made over the last decade or so could change, particularly around health and so on. So although that is, like I say, it's all good, we do just need to bear in mind what the future might look like. So it could look very different. So with that, I'll pass that back over to Pam.
Thanks, Jess. I don't know whether you want to pause at this moment in time just to take questions on Jess's part of the presentation, Chair.
Yes, I think that's a good idea if anybody's got any questions. Yeah, does any members want to ask any questions?
Councillor Tom Kirkham has raised his hand.
Yeah. Tom, would you like to come in, please?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks very much for that presentation. It's very interesting. My question is just a little bit about how it works out. So these action groups, who forms the action groups? Is it from people in the community or is it from officers in the council?
It's a mixture, Councillor Kirkham. It'll be statutory organisations and officers from the council, but it's community representatives as well, parish and town council representatives. They are open to the public as well, and members of the public do attend, not in huge numbers, but they are there. So it's a mix really of different areas.
Thanks. And the recommendations from these action groups, who effectively sits on the executive board, who determines to support them or not?
Yeah, the executive board is made up of representatives from each of the action groups, so they nominate someone to sit on there, so they take that responsibility. They're mandated to speak for that specific theme, for example, community safety or maybe health and well-being. One of the things that Jess obviously referred to there is, you know, they are led by key officers for obvious reasons. For example, health and well-being is led by public health. And similarly, community safety is by the district council's responsibility for community safety and the police. So that's how it works in terms of the flow through to executive board.
Thanks. Last question. With respect to employment and skills, so we're on the growth committee today. How can we better interact with the partnership in order to help the groups better integrate with what we're doing on our growth committee?
Well, obviously, the link is through that group, the Employment and Skills group. Obviously, Laura Keller in my team leads on a lot of the employment and skills stuff, particularly around doing a skills audit that we're currently commissioning. And also, we're part of a bid that's been put in about an Institute of Technology. So we are doing some work with local universities and local colleges along that side of things. So anything that's done is through that group and through my team. So anybody that wants to get involved in that just needs to get involved through those routes.
Okay, and it's fair for us to keep this in mind when we're forming our scrutiny topics later on as well.
Okay.
You said, yeah. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else got any questions?
Councillor Clough, Chair.
Yeah, would you like to come in, Councillor Clough?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just looking at the report on page 51. It's 51 in black, but it's 23 on the Green Sustainable Community Strategy, and it's referring to antisocial behaviour. And it's the second part of it where it says provide positive activities for young people in target areas, particularly young people as being identified as being at risk. It's just something that I've noted, that it's not just the young people that are involved in antisocial behaviours. I just wondered whether we could remove that first word young so that it read provide positive activities for people in target areas, particularly young people. So we're not taking the young people away from that, but that we're recognising that it's not always the young people that are involved in antisocial behaviours.
I think that's a fair point there. The page that you're referring to, I think it's the Crime and Community Safety Partnerships Action Plan. So that's something that they've developed. But if it's okay with you, we can feed that back. So it is a fair point.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is anybody else wishing to speak?
Chair, there's no other hands raised at the moment.
Right. Well, at this point then, I'd like to thank Pam and her team for a very interesting information report from them. And we'll move on to the next item, Donna.
So, Chair, this is the first half of the presentation. So Pam's now got
Right.
the second part about the partnership response to the coronavirus.
Right. Thank you,
Oh,
Pam.
So Pam, I'll just put your presentation back on screen for you, just a moment.
You.
Thanks, Donna. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, this part of the presentation is not going to be very lengthy. Obviously, these slides were prepared some weeks ago before we're now in the second wave of the pandemic. So I will update you towards the end of the meeting on current status. But obviously, when the lockdown started in March, we had to act quite quickly in terms of support for local communities. So the leader authorised myself to create the community response team, which involved my team and also working with furloughed leisure staff and also the contact centre staff, who were frontline staff taking the calls directly. So we were swiftly operational and we worked well up until demand subsided, which was around early June in the first wave of the pandemic. Obviously, that involved the arrangement of food parcels, and we did that very quickly. Got food together and prepared the food parcels with the leisure team. Obviously, if the family was a large family, they got more than one food parcel, etc. We also were contacted by local pharmacies to get prescriptions and medication to people who were isolating and shielding. And we worked closely with the pharmacies to ensure our staff could access the chemists easily and safely, because the demand obviously increased and people were queuing outside of pharmacies. But what they arranged for us to do is, because we'd got so many to deliver, that we could actually get into the pharmacy, pick them all up as a bulk delivery, and then we'd be able to get them out as quickly as possible. Careful delivery process when we were delivering them, so we'd deliver them to the door and we'd not be doing any sort of contact with the recipient. They'd be just left at the door with, for the recipient to pick up. We also dealt with the provision of PPE, providing gloves, masks and hand sanitizer, and that's to all our staff here at the council and anyone else that needed support in that respect. So again, through our procurement team, we coordinated that provision in terms of the provision of PPE. One of the extensive impacts that we picked up as a community support team, and on the slide it talks about quite distressing calls that we took from customers who were elderly, lonely and isolated, and obviously the impact of that is becoming all too evident now. But in the early stages, again, there were quite some traumatic calls that my staff were involved in taking, involving probably being on a phone call for at least half an hour to 45 minutes. But it was needed and that person really benefited from that. So obviously it's a skill that my staff probably didn't have to that extent beforehand, but they do now. And similarly, in terms of helping local people, in terms of how flexible the team have been, is that, if it was too late to get to deliver a certain medication, then the staff on their way home would deliver that medication or a food parcel if a request came in late. So again, it's been very flexible. The staff have been fantastic through leisure, contact centres and my team, and all stepped up to the mark, and it was a really good response. No one was ever refused support, even when the demand started to slow down. So even now, if we got a request for some level of support, we would do our best to provide that. So, the lines are never shut down. We always, take contact from external people when they need support. all the service areas went above and beyond what was required in the difficult circumstances. And I've talked about the other services, but obviously Wayne Carter from Leisure and Leslie Botham in the Leisure Centre as manager all had an input with myself, and it worked extremely well. We were the central point of coordination, and obviously the leader was really impressed with the way all the staff involved got involved. And he did, obviously you all received the regular bulletins that he did in terms of the numbers that we were dealing with at that time. And the numbers were collated through the contact centres. And I understand, I think Leslie's and Wayne are doing separate presentations to different scrutinies on the numbers provided. Alongside that, we were also, my team, involved in administering government grants that we'd been given for provision of PPE to local businesses. So again, we had requests from local businesses where they were trying to open back up and needed PPE to be able to do that. So we processed grants for up to £500 to provide screens, masks, gloves, anything that people were requiring to be able to open their business up again. And similarly, the Business Growth Fund, again, through COVID, we will be able to administer Business Growth Fund applications from local businesses for up to £10,000 to help support them get back up and running and doing, delivering a service out in the community. So again, that was all being done alongside responding to the pandemic. That was up until a few weeks ago, as you know, and now things are looking very different in terms of a second wave. At the moment, as you know, we're still in the lowest tier of the pandemic in terms of the response. These things are changing daily, and I think it's not if we go into the next tier, it'll be when. You know that some surrounding and the communities are already in the next tier, with Chesterfield, North East Derbyshire, and Nottinghamshire looking like they may be going into the highest tier anytime soon. So we are aware that at some point we will get a demand in terms of stepping up the community support response again. We're ready to do that. I think it's a very different world this time around, because people have learned a lot from the first wave in terms of what they need to do to keep themselves safe, in terms of the hand washing and the masks and the social distancing. The provision of food banks has been amazing, and they are still up and running, and we still make referrals to the food banks where we can. So again, in terms of demand on us to provide food, I don't think that will be as much. I mean, I may be wrong, but at the moment, I think the provision out there is coping very well. The shielding list, again, will be being utilised by the county council in terms of making sure those who are having to shield will get the support that they need. And obviously, I know that they will call on local councils to help support that. And we will obviously work through the Director of Public Health at the county to support that wherever we can. So, the team are ready for any demand that comes our way. The directors here are keeping in touch with the local resilience forums, getting regular updates on a daily basis on how things are moving. So, we're ahead of the game in terms of getting information, and the leader's keen that, we stay on top of that. And obviously the team are ready to take that forward alongside leisure and contact centres again as the first point of call. And what I would say is, staff have adapted extremely well to utilising other skills. They've had to, but they've done it willingly. And I think, it's all credit to particularly leisure staff who have had to do lots of other different types of work, but have been willing to do so. So that's the response up to date. I don't really want to say any more about that at this point, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Have we got anybody wishing to ask any questions?
I think Councillor Kirkham is raising his hand. I'm not sure if he's... Yes, I think he is. Sorry, Chair.
Yeah, no, it's quite all right, Donna. Would you like to bring him in, Councillor Kirkham?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks very much again for that presentation. It's excellent work, and I know that people in my community have benefited from the service, and it's been a vital support. With respect to setting this up, are you saying that if the leader hadn't authorised this, it wouldn't have happened? And going into this next phase of coronavirus, with stages and is it tiers? Are we going to be more prompted by government on these tiers in terms of what support we can offer? I understand that when you move into tier 2, you get more support as well. And does that affect our services at all? Thanks.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying that if the leader hadn't have authorised it, we would have stepped up to that, no problem at all. I mean, that's the role that we provide in terms of supporting communities. So I think, it's fair comment to say we would have done that anyway, but the leader was very keen that we did, obviously, and I'm sure you all are supportive of that. In terms of keeping ahead of, what's to come if we're going to the other tiers, yes, you're right. I think we would get more support from government if we were in the next tier. But at the moment, we're still in the lower tier where we can still mix 6 people. We can still use all the social distancing and obviously the hand washing and the masks. We can still visit pubs and restaurants at the moment. So, life continues as much as it can be normal for us at the moment. But yeah, if we get into the next tier, then I'm sure that, the directors will be being instructed from the local resilience forums on what's available to us from government for us to help tackle some of that.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anybody else wants coming in?
Councillor Dooley, are you wishing to come in the chamber? I'm sorry, I can't quite see clearly.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yes,
Councillor, yes, carry on, Councillor.
Yeah, you've had a whistle-stop presentation today. You've had the Bolsover Partnership Funding and Performance and also the Sustainable Community Strategy. Together we make a difference, and the team that are in charge of this, making this difference, is truly amazing. The performance of our partnership team, Sarah Chambers is on the front of the funding and performance, and she's working in leisure. They've been working, same as Pam says, to fantastic. They've just done fantastic. Pam hasn't had a day off throughout the pandemic, so have 1 or 2 of her staff haven't. So I just want to reiterate that if the leader was here, he'd say exactly the same. They're truly amazing. They've done a wonderful job, and I'm very proud to be the cabinet member for leisure and the partnership team.
Thank you for that, Mary. I think we're all behind you on that and sending our regards and thanks to everybody. Anybody there?
Chair, I don't see any other hands raised from members at the moment.
Oh, sorry, Donna, thank you. Right, so I'd like to thank you very much for that informative presentation and for everybody in the team who've worked so hard again. I think we're moving on to a new item now, are we? Donna, are we moving? Do I need a mover and a seconder?
Yes, Chair, just to receive the presentation.
Yeah. Well, as chair, I'll move it, that we accept it, and thank everybody again. And Trish Clough, thank you, you're seconding it.
Yes, thanks.
Thank you. Could I ask for a show of hands for all in favour?
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you, everybody, for that. And thank you again, Pam, and your team for excellent work. I believe we're moving on to item 5 now, is it?
Item 7, Chair.
Oh, right. Got to cross them off. Right. That commences on page 137. And I'd like you to start the presentation as soon as you're ready, please.
Thank you, Chair. So what we're going to do, I mean, obviously that's a really hard act to follow there with the standard that they've set in terms of what they delivered. But what we want to do is just talk a bit about the empty property strategy for Bolsover District. At the minute, it's we brought it to you as we said we would as part of the consultation to see, are you happy with the direction of travel for the empty property strategy for Bolsover, and if there's anything that you wish to see included over and above the work that Thomas has identified already and started to pull together. So if I'll hand over to Tom, and what he'll do is he'll talk you through the strategy and a bit about the why we've sort of selected what we've selected in terms of actions and the like.
Thank you.
Morning, everyone. Nice to see everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Thomas Evans, and I deal with properties across the district. As Carl said, what we're going to do this morning is give you an overview of this first draft of the strategy. There'll be an opportunity for questions at the end. So I think Donna or Joe, if you would you mind going to page 5, which is the
if I can just put in there, Chair, a minute, we're struggling to hear him in the chamber. I don't know if anybody else is on their iPads.
Yeah, you're quite right, Chris. We are. Well, I am. I don't know about anybody else.
Let me see if I can come a bit. I'll come a bit closer and see if that makes a difference.
Oh yes, definitely.
Is that better?
Chris, can you hear that better?
Yeah, that's a lot better, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Apologies for that.
No.
So yeah, I would like to stress this is a draft strategy. So there's bits of information that we're still waiting on, as you'll see as we work through. And the idea of this morning is really to consult with you. And if you think there's anything that needs changing or adding, you know, I'm grateful for that feedback. So if you wouldn't mind showing.
Yeah, I'm just gonna bring that up for you. Just bear with me one moment, and then if you can remind me which page you want me to go on to.
Thank you.
Okay, so you want page 5 of the strategy?
Yes, please, where the executive summary starts.
Okay, is that okay?
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you, Donna. So just to make you aware, the previous strategy, property strategy, was actually joint, and that's come to the end of its lifespan. So we recognised that we needed to write a new one, and we also thought it was appropriate that we write one solely for Bolsover. So starting with the executive summary, this basically gives a full overview of the strategy. So if you weren't wanting to read the whole document, this kind of raises the main points. So what we've done, we've looked at challenges that we face with empty properties, but we've also looked at the achievements. So the work that we've done with Action Housing has actually seen us recognised with an award at the National Empty Homes Conference. So it's important that we look forward and that we have the strategy, you know, as a working document to help us achieve what we want to, but it's also an opportunity to look back, you know, on what we've achieved. So as at August 2020, we had 754 long-term empty properties in the district. So around a third of these have been empty for more than 2 years, and they tend to be the ones that cause the most problems, which I'll cover more as we go forward. So as I mentioned before, we've worked with Action Housing on a number of projects. We brought a number of empty buildings, both residential and commercial, back into use. And not only has that created more housing, it's also created more much needed affordable housing. If you wouldn't mind moving it down, Donna, please. Thank you. And it's also what I wanted to say in the executive summary and point out how this links the council's plans and supports it. Moving on to the introduction, it reiterates the number of empty properties that we've got across the district.
Sorry, Tom, you're just starting to break up a little bit again.
Sorry, I'll come further forward. Is that better?
I think so. It's just we can. I think the volume's okay. It's just crackling a little bit.
Okay, apologies. So yeah, 754 properties that have been empty for more than 6 months. This is an increase of about 100 since the same time last year. Largely, this is due to the impact of COVID-19, because there was a period where everything just came to a stop with the housing market. So those types of transactions just weren't able to be completed. It also affected the allocation of rental council properties, and also properties in the other areas of social housing. So we're expecting that this number will come down as we adapt to a new way of life. And I know that estate agents are now seeing an increase in sales, and that social housing is now being allocated. So as I said, I would expect that number to come down over the next few months. It is a trend. I was on the Empty Homes Network the other day, and a lot of councils have noticed an increase for the same reasons, and some have seen their figures double. So, you know, comparatively, things aren't that bad in this district. So obviously there's recognised benefits to bringing empty properties back into use. And we've launched a number of initiatives over the last few years to help owners. And we're continuing to see empty properties being brought back into use through these initiatives. If you wouldn't mind moving the page on, please, Donna. So we've given a definition to what is an empty property. So empty, it's always recognised that there are going to be empty properties, and often it's a sign of a decent, healthy housing market. So most properties that are empty tend to be empty for less than 6 months, and that's because they're either on the market or they're waiting for someone to rent it out. So those are what we call transactional empty properties. A long-term empty property is generally a property that's been empty for more than 6 months, and those are the properties that we focus on. So there's often a number of genuine reasons why properties are empty. So there could be issues with probate, financial problems. It might not be able to be sold or let. The owner may be in care. So largely, there are often genuine reasons, but unfortunately, there are cases where there is just an unwillingness from the owner to bring the empty property back into use, and those tend to be the most problematic. So we, as a council, support owners and treat them on an individual basis, recognising that everyone's circumstances are different. And often, I think taking this approach helps the owners and also encourages them, bring them back into use. There's a number of other classifications for empty properties. So these could be second homes. Often we find that we've got properties that aren't listed as empty. So on our council tax database, they're actually down as occupied, particularly single occupation. And the reason for that is that the council tax is less. There is a 25% discount. So that's where we need to work with the Revenues Department to identify, because technically that is fraud. So we do work quite closely with them to get the classification changed. And Donna, sorry, if you wouldn't mind moving on to the next page, please. Sorry, can you just move further up for me? Sorry. Okay, so again, I mentioned when I started that we are still waiting on some data. So I've highlighted that there is a housing need in the district. Currently, we've got over 1,600 people on the waiting list for the council for a council property. We have a homeless department, so we've been approached by people as homelessness, and we've also placed people in temporary accommodation. So really, I wanted to mention this to highlight the fact that we shouldn't have empty properties when there are people in genuine need of a home. So why have an empty property strategy? Well, the main reason for this is to set out our objectives and also to really stress the council's stance on how we are and how we deal with empty properties. And it also contributes to the wider council plan as well. So empty properties can have a negative impact on their locality. So they often attract antisocial behaviour. They can also become a drain on local authorities and other services such as the fire and the police force. So the main problems or the main complaints that we get regarding empty properties, so it could be the deterioration of the building, fly tipping, overgrown gardens. That's something that's become very common, particularly over this summer, which in turn causes vermin, squatting, arson, graffiti, and all this can have a negative impact on property prices too. So I work quite closely with environmental health, planning enforcement, community safety and the fire and police, and attend various working groups, take a joint working approach to target problematic empty properties. So we have a corporate enforcement group that's held every 6 weeks, and I also attend the deliberate fires group, which is attended by obviously the fire service, the police service, and various other organisations and partners that are involved with empty buildings. If you wouldn't mind moving the page, please, Anna. Yeah, so it's not only communities and residents that can be affected by empty properties, it actually has a negative impact on the owner. Firstly, there's the financial impact because they're having to pay council tax on a property that's not being used, ongoing maintenance costs, and also the psychological problems associated with it as well. So the more the property that deteriorates, the higher the cost is going to be to get them to bring it back into use. And that's why largely we're here to support owners. But if they don't engage, then we do have enforcement powers that we can use, which I'll cover as we move on. So moving on to principles, I just wanted to highlight, as I said before, how empty properties link in to the council plan. So enabling housing growth, obviously bringing disused buildings, both commercial and residential, creates more housing, and that's something that we've achieved. We've, as I said before, we've worked with housing associations such as Action Housing to unlock Homes in England funding to convert empty properties into needed affordable housing. And also where we're making best use of our existing stock, help to meet the district's housing need. So providing good quality housing where people choose to live. We hold regular landlord events across the district, which are free for landlords to attend. This keeps us up to date with legislation and helps to encourage a better private rented sector. We also work with other registered providers to convert empty properties back into use. This can be for general needs housing or supported accommodation to support those that are most vulnerable. So ensuring financial stability and increasing our revenue streams, returning empty properties back into use increases our council tax revenue, particularly disused commercial buildings where we're not receiving any income from at all. So an example of this is the Station Hotel and Miners Welfare in Creswell that have both been empty for over 15 years. And they've now both been converted into flats. That has for the council that obviously that is an income generator. Legislation allows for councils to charge a higher premium of council tax for empty properties that have been empty for more than 2 years. This isn't something that Bolsover Council does at the moment. It's something that could be explored and could potentially generate income, but also encourage owners to bring their property back into use. And that's something I'll go into a little bit more detail as we move forward. But ensuring a high standard of environmental cleanliness, so bringing long-term problematic empty properties back into use reaps benefits. It helps the owners and it also helps communities as well. And this is something that we do alongside environmental health and our planning and enforcement team. So just to give you an idea, that the population of Bolsover, as probably I'm sure you already know, is just over 80,000, and there are around 35,000 households in the district. The Strategic Housing Market Assessment states that we need another 126 homes per year every year from 2014 to 2034 to meet the housing need of the district. Empty properties aren't included in that figure. However, this still highlights that bringing empty properties back into use can help and certainly reduce that need. So of our own stock, we do have empty properties. They are empty for genuine reasons, and often they are going through a program of regeneration. It's just something that we need to consider. And again, that data will be added at a later date when I've received that. But moving on to the national picture, at November 2019, there were approximately 226,000 empty homes in the United Kingdom, and those have all been empty for more than 6 months. That had actually increased from 2018. This strategy will actually have this year's figures once they've been released, and I do imagine that will have increased from that number again for the reasons I spoke about before. And then moving down the page, we've got some graphs just to illustrate what the picture is nationally. So you can see the East Midlands fairly low in comparison to other areas, with the Northwest being the highest. And then we've actually broken this down for Derbyshire wide. So you can see how we compare with the other districts. Again, this is data from last year. We're still waiting for the data for this year, which should be released in December. So that will be updated on here. Moving on to council tax. As of 2013, government legislation allowed local authorities to charge 150% council tax on properties that have been empty for more than 2 years. Last year, they actually increased this to 200%, and they've further increased it for the longer the property is empty. So if your property's been empty for less than 2 years, you would still have to pay the standard 100% council tax charge. Empty for more than 2 years, it will be 200%, 5 years plus 300%, and 10 years, and this will be introduced from 2021, this will be 400%. So this isn't something that bowls over currently apply. However, it is something that is being monitored, and that may be introduced in the future. And there's a working group that's been established to have a look at that to see if we could potentially introduce that. But not all properties are charged a council tax bill. So if the Bolsover Council currently gives people 3 months free while they're getting the property ready for reoccupation, recognising again that there are genuine reasons why properties are empty, and that sometimes it does take a little bit of time. If it's been empty, if it's empty after that period, then there's a 100% charge. If it's empty and uninhabitable, so where a property can't be lived in, the charge is 100. Sorry, there is no charge. That's exempt for 1 year. After that year, if it's still not been brought back into use, regardless of its condition, the charge reverts to 100%. And as you can see below, there's various other exemptions. So if probate hasn't been granted, then there's no charge until it has been granted. If they're in care or in prison, or the property's been repossessed, then again there's an exemption there, recognising those circumstances. For second homes, there is a 100% charge. So a second home they would class as being furnished. So sometimes we get complaints about properties that are empty, but there's furniture inside there. So again, that comes back to working with our revenues team to understand, you know, what those circumstances are and whether it actually is an empty property, which would then allow us to take the appropriate action to bring that property back into use. So if you wouldn't mind moving the page on, please, Donna. So I've just summarised in this section how the council can assist, what services we can offer to owners of empty properties, and also where owners won't engage with us, the enforcement powers that we have. So on the table below, if you wouldn't mind just scrolling down, please. Thank you. We have, and this is something actually that applies nationally. So if your property has been empty for more than 2 years, you can pay a reduced rate of VAT on the renovation works, and a letter from the council would qualify that owner to claim that back. There's no charge for that service, and that's something that we promote on our website and also on any paraphernalia that we send out to owners. So if it's been empty between 2 and 10 years, the VAT goes down to 5%. If it's been empty for more than 10 years, then it's 0. So there's no VAT charged. We have a property matching system, so we've got a number of developers who we're in contact with who are interested in buying empty properties. And also, if your property's been empty for more than 6 months, you can actually advertise it on the council website for free. The housing health and safety rating system is something that can help owners who are looking to rent their property out and bring it up to a lettable standard. So myself or people from the environmental health department can go in and carry out an inspection and identify whether the property is fit to be rented out and what works would need doing. And again, that is something we can do for free. And I mentioned before, we hold an annual landlord event landlords up to date with.
Sorry, Tom. Tom, can I just ask you to pause just a moment? Chair, we've just been joined by Councillor Tom Munro. So just to bring him into the meeting, just to explain, we're on the empty property strategy at item 7, and Tom Evans, the housing officer, is just going through that strategy. We're on page 152 of the agenda pack, and we've got that on screen. Sorry, Chair, I'm happy.
No,
carry on.
Fine, yes, carry on, lovely.
So as I was saying, we hold the landlord event. That's an opportunity for landlords share best practice, get updates on legislation. As you're all probably aware, the legislation changes quite rapidly, so it's important for landlords and owners of empty properties to keep up to date with what they're required to do. Moving on to enforcement measures, so where owners don't engage with us and we're looking at a problematic empty property, there is legislation that allows local authorities to take enforcement action. So just to give you a brief overview of what these are, there's a compulsory purchase order. So this allows councils to acquire properties that are empty, causing a nuisance, and there has to be identified housing need in the area. So there doesn't have to be any charges registered on the property for a compulsory purchase order. It is a lengthy and costly process, and the council has to give the owner the market value of the property plus 7.5% of that as compensation. So really that one is only to be used as a last resort. There's enforced sale. So where the council's carried out works in default, an example might be an overgrown garden where the owners failed to do anything about it and the council's gone in and cleared it. A charge is then registered on the property. So if the owner doesn't pay that charge, then the council can force a sale of that property. So a bit more straightforward than compulsory purchase order because it is based on that financial charge. There's something called an empty dwelling management order, which is similar to private sector leasing, which I mentioned before with Action Housing, where owners lease their properties to housing associations or councils, and the council manage that property. The council or housing association manage that property for up to 7 years, bring it back into use, put a tenant in there. It's an enforced way, so the owner doesn't have any say in the council doing that. And then there's something called the order for sale. So where there's a council tax debt outstanding for the empty property, the council can recover this by forcing the sale of the property. So it's very similar to the enforced sale I mentioned before, but it's based on the council tax debt. And then further below, we've got a list of our partners, people who we work with to help bring properties back into use. I've mentioned Action Housing. As I said, we've worked with them on quite a few projects where they've accessed Homes England funding to do renovation works and then rent the property out as affordable general needs or supported housing. And then there's other registered providers who operate in the district who we work with as well, and who have similar leasing models. So when we're speaking to owners who want to lease their property, or they might not have the means to bring it back into use themselves, we can put them in contact with those people. And then below, we've got how we're going to deliver our plan and what's involved. So the aims and objectives are to address the issues of empty properties, to bring them back into use to meet the district's housing need, particularly affordable and specialist housing, which there is a need for. We'll promote the work that we do to bring empty properties back into use. That'll be through our website, through our newsletters and through individual letters to empty property owners, tackle problematic empty properties, work with environmental health, other agencies where they're causing a problem to communities, also to improve the quality of housing in the district and help improve the private rented sector as well. So moving on to resources, delivering this strategy is reliant largely on people. However, when writing this, it's been identified that if we're wanting to take enforcement action, particularly compulsory purchase orders, then it may be that a budget would need to be allocated. So the idea would be that any case such as this would be assessed on an individual basis, and would involve the people that are mentioned below, including themselves. And then I've listed our internal partners. So we've got yourselves again, revenues, environmental health, planning enforcement, legal, finance, communications, housing strategy team, estates, and community safety. If you wouldn't mind moving the page on, please, Donna. And then I've mentioned before our key external partners, which I mentioned in the table above. So we'll monitor performance as we do at the moment through Perform, and this will be updated every 3 months. And I will also assess the number of empty properties each year when the new homes bonus figures are released, to monitor trends and how the number of empty properties are in comparison to other authorities, and what the picture is like in Bolsover. There is a possibility that new homes bonus won't be around forever, but regardless of that, this is something that will still continue. If you wouldn't mind moving the page on, please, Donna. And then we've got the action plan. So the way that we identify empty properties largely through the council tax data. So this is done regularly, and from this we send out letters to every owner of an empty property to promote our services and ask why the property is empty. We need to utilise enforcement powers more. I think that's been recognised. So that will be work that involves the planning and enforcement team, environmental health and legal services. I've mentioned before, we're looking at the council tax premium, so a working group has been established to have a look at that. So that's ongoing. We're targeted to bring 5 long-term empty properties back into use each year. I'm confident that we can do that with the resources that we have, and that has been exceeded in previous years. We'll promote our property matching service through our website and when we're talking to owners. And we'll hold regular landlord events to promote better private rented sector and also promote what services we can offer. So although I've mentioned a lot about residential buildings, we also look at commercial buildings. So empty commercial buildings can often be the most problematic. So bringing them back into use has numerous benefits for local residents and for us as the council. So we'll promote the leasing schemes that I mentioned before to owners to help bring their properties back into use. And we also will develop a compulsory purchase order procedure. The idea behind this is to promote this to owners, to let them know that we are serious about taking action against empty properties. But also it's a useful document for those who are taking the enforcement actions, such as myself, environmental health and legal, to have reference to when making the order. And if you wouldn't mind moving on to the next page, please, Donna. And I apologise for how this looks on here. The final draft, it will be clearer, but this just gives a list of other action that the council can take against empty properties, and just goes into a little bit more detail. So it just the various notices that the council can serve on properties where they're causing a problem. And if you wouldn't mind moving on to the next page, please, Donna. And then finally, a list of useful websites for people to reference. So we've got our websites, the National Empty Homes Network, Dash, who are a landlord accreditation service who Bolsover Council subscribe to. So any landlord in the district can join Dash for free, and they provide legislation updates for landlords, and also they promote our landlord event as well. And similarly, the National Landlords Association, the Shelter, .gov.uk, and then also Action Housing, who we work with. And that's it from me. Come to the end of the strategy. If there's any, happy to take any questions now.
There's Councillor Derek Adams and Councillor Tom Kirkham.
Right, Derek, would you like to start first, please?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tom, for that report. A couple of things that did concern me was the incentive for people to leave them empty for 2 years with the VAT. And I'd like to see, right at the very end, the empty property compulsory purchase order. I'd like to see that procedure added to properties with unruly tenants in and drug addicts in. Compulsory purchase. I don't know if that comes under your remit or what.
Okay, no, I can answer both of those things. In terms of the VAT, I appreciate what you're saying. My experience is that it doesn't provide an incentive for owners. Often they don't actually know about it. So it tends to be myself if I'm dealing with someone who's got an empty property and it's been empty for more than 2 years, I would mention that to them. I mean, I did say it is mentioned on the website, but like I say, it's not something that is widely known. So by the very nature of that, I honestly don't think that's an incentive. And as I say, it tends to be something that's mentioned by myself, or it might be mentioned by their builder. So they've already started the work.
Right, thank you.
So, if that answers that question.
Yeah.
Going back to the compulsory purchase order, the property has to be empty, or doing it through the empty homes procedure. So if there was a property that was occupied, then that procedure wouldn't be able to be applied. If you're talking about squatters in a property, that's different because it wouldn't be classed as occupied. So that's potentially something that could link in.
Right, thank you.
Does that answer that?
Yeah, it does. Thank you very much, Tom.
Can I bring Sarah Sternberg in first, please?
Thanks. Just a quick point on compulsory purchase. There are a variety of powers for making a compulsory purchase order, and clearly they all cover different circumstances. I'm not aware of any that would cover compulsory purchase because of antisocial behaviour tenants. I will ask the question of the team, but I think it unlikely that there will be a power we could use for that, for compulsory purchase.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. Tom Kirkham, if you would like to come in next.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for that, Tom. Appreciate you going through that document. I'm not very good with slides. Would be better next time if that's possible, though, please. My questions are: what kind of innovation are you looking at to get some of these properties occupied? I mean, you mentioned the looking at the council tax and how it can be increased by 200% and then onwards, and that the council's not yet made a decision on that. Who is making that decision? Is it officers or is it a combination of officers and councillors?
There's currently a working group that's been established, and then I believe it will have to go through the usual channels of going to executive and cabinet, and to a forum such as this.
Right.
I think that's the case, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not going to be an officer decision. That will have to be an executive decision on the council tax, and it goes to full council for council tax settings. So it's not an officer decision. We can only make recommendations regarding that.
Okay, just that a lot of councillors have got second properties, so it might be, I don't know, a conflict of interest for some people to cast decisions on that. But it does seem a good quick way of getting some empty properties, put the pressure on. I know in our constituency, where I am, we've had a few empty properties which have just been left to go and fall down, and then the person who owns them has built more properties on top of them. I'm sure if the council tax was increasing, it might stop that. The other thing is, in Mansfield, there were some empty council properties that were given to veterans to do up for a small amount of money. Have we looked at doing any schemes like that? Sort of creative schemes to get people to occupy empty properties, or do we not have any suitable areas of housing that we're in control of that could cover by such a scheme?
We've there's been similar schemes in the past with Groundwork Cresswell on the private rented sector. In terms of our council-owned properties, we have the sort of DLO who have sort of the skills and the ability to deliver that. I mean, Bolsover Housing may be looking at throwing that open wider with the apprenticeship and Kickstarter program, but not in terms of council-owned properties. That's not been something that we've pushed. And in terms of the private sector, it's finding willing owners to do that, I suppose. And then it's how do you manage that program as well.
Okay, and final question is with respect to commercial property. We've spoke about this in previous growth committees about Plesley Mills and the empty office blocks there. I still think there's a real opportunity for us to be able to give some of those office spaces a really low rent to start up businesses, especially during the pandemic where people are being put out of work and are looking for new starts. I think that would be a really interesting thing for us to look at, and I wondered if you'd consider doing that at all.
Well, that again would be an area that wouldn't sit within our remit. That's kind of the estates department would decide what to do with the council-owned property. I suppose some of the things that will work, because linking in with economic development work that we do at Bolsover and D2N2, is sort of recognising that actually commercial space, the nature of it is changing, because as you see now, most of us are working from home. So some businesses are actually finding that they don't need as big space as they had previously, so they're looking to downsize. And it's now looking at how do you reimagine commercial space for the future? Does it need to be big offices, or does it need to be designed in a new way? Does it need to be more flexible space? Not necessarily smaller units, but space that can be carved up in different ways and moved around quite flexibly as people drop in, drop out of that space. But again, that's something that the economic development team at Bolsover will be dealing with. We, in terms of commercial empty properties, we will link up with the Bolsover economic development team, D2N2, any businesses that we're made aware of that are looking for commercial space, and try and link up those two, because that becomes a quick win for us in terms of that empty property gets repurposed and reused. But some of it is unfortunately being turned into residential space. So we know that the pub industry was struggling before the pandemic. And I think what the pandemic has done is accelerated the decline that some businesses were going to have over the next 5 years and turned it into 5 months. So some businesses that were always on shaky ground have gone, which is obviously not what we want, but it does leave that space behind, and it's how do we reimagine what that space is used. Some of it might be that we create residential space in there, because that creates, if it's in the middle of a town centre, then you've suddenly got people living in the town centre who are more likely to shop local because there's the shops on their doorsteps. So there are opportunities in that respect, but again, it does reduce the commercial offering in the town centres. So it has to be thought of on each building, and whether it's appropriate for it to become residential or for it to stay as commercial space, and maybe reimagine commercial space.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Derek, if you'd like to come in, please.
So I think Councillor Adams has already asked his question, but Councillor Tom Munro has a question.
Right, thank you. Tom, if you'd like to come in.
Thank you, Chair, and my apologies for having to leave the meeting and then rejoin. I had a rather urgent meeting with Cresswell Crags, of which I'm a trust member.
Thank you.
So my apologies for that, first of all. Yeah, just some observations, really, as a member who's been involved now for nearly 5 years as a district councillor. We flagged up very early on in our own community an empty property, which was the ex-co-op on Welbeck Street in Whitwell, and I worked very closely with Carl and other officers, and within a fairly short space of time, for local authority speak, obviously, it was identified as worth offering to Action Housing, and Action Housing are now, I would say, 80% of the way through converting it into 5 one-bedroom flats. And it will, I hope, within the next 2 or 3 months, begin to be occupied by people who have been desperate for affordable rented accommodation. And it's particularly acute at the moment because I know, because I'm involved in helping 1 or 2 local residents with searches for local property, for council property, that single occupancy properties are in desperately short supply. So it's just a good example of what can happen during the course of that process. Just to give people, other councillors, some assurance, things did grind to a halt, which Carl will remember, in the last couple of months with the particular contractor. And all I did was contact Carl, who contacted the contractor, and within a week or 2, they were back on site. It was quite legitimate. They'd had to go away and deal with other emergencies tied in with the coronavirus situation. They're now currently back on site, and I expect, as I say, completion will be sometime in the next month. So it's just an example of how, if you are aware of properties and you're not sure whether they're empty or there could be somebody in there you don't know about, you can always flag them up with the department. They will investigate and report back to you as the local member. Just hope that helps other in particular newer members to know that the service has worked for me. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tom. Any more questions from anybody? Donna?
No, I don't see any other questions from members, but Joe, the scrutiny officer, just wishes to come in.
Thank
you.
And
sorry, and Councillor Peake in the chamber also wishes to come in. Councillor Peake, should we take her first?
Yeah, that's fine, no problem.
Yeah.
You want me to come in first?
Yes,
yeah?
Please, Sandra. Yes, please.
Right. Okay, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd just like to thank Tom and Carl for the very detailed report. Actually, I thought they covered everything quite well, and I think members can see how difficult it is when you're dealing with empty properties, when you're trying to get in touch with owners. As you can see, some of the reasons why it's such a lengthy process, people living abroad, even people who are having divorce disputes and things like that. So it's quite varied. But I think we work well with private landlords, letting them know all about legislation and what we can offer to help them to get that property back into use. And as Tom's just said, that's an example of what has been done in Whitwell. So I think, officers work hard, and it is a very lengthy process, and as Sarah will confirm, there's legality involved in that. So thank you once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Joanna, did you want to come in next?
Yes, Chair. Just in relation to Councillor Kirkham's point around veterans, I just wanted to remind members that there has been a review ongoing with Customer Service and Transformation, which has been looking at how we re-let council properties in particular. So while it's not necessarily linked with sort of wider renewal of private sector housing, we have been looking at how we let to particular groups within the community, including veterans. So that is something that's been considered. We have asked for that to be more robust in a policy that was rewritten recently as well. So just to reassure Councillor Kirkham that is being taken on by another committee. I appreciate you might not have notes at the side of your chair. Is it worth me just going through a couple of the points that we talked about at pre-meet? I'm conscious that Councillor Clough left the meeting and there was certainly something that she was going to raise. And I could potentially do that on her behalf, if you're okay with that.
I'm okay with that.
So obviously Councillor Rose talked about the activity in Whitwell, and we had an item earlier in the year where Tom came to committee, and Carl I think was there as well, where we had Action Housing present and we were looking in more detail around private rented sector. One of the things we talked about at the time was around the use of selective licensing, and we commented in pre-meet how that wasn't within this strategy. Now I don't know if that's something that would naturally feature in the strategy or would be taken on board in another way, but selective licensing was one of the areas that you picked up on. Another thing, when comparing this strategy with the old strategy, and just in general, and I think it came up when we had the meeting earlier in the year, it was really to understand how members can link in with this a little bit more. So sort of thinking about the action plan at the end, there's not necessarily specific action about how members could be engaged with that in terms of helping to either identify properties or support activity in terms of bringing particularly troublesome properties back to use, where as a ward member you may be getting regular comments from residents, etc. So they were 2 points in particular that I think I don't know if they've been picked up so far, and I think in the past we've talked about types or mechanisms of enforcement. So I know there are a couple in the report at section 5.3. It was just is that all the bases, if that makes sense. I think when we were looking at other things in the past, we talked about other types of notices. It was just whether that needed to be there in any more detail. I think that covers all the points that we came up at pre-meet, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah.
If I can respond regarding the selective licensing, it is something that we've discussed in the past. We've met with environmental health colleagues, and have also gone to other councils where they run selective licensing schemes. It's almost, discussing environmental health, it almost feels like it's about 5 years too late in some respects. It would have been appropriate looking back, specifically in Shirebrook, with the Sports Direct when it first opened, and there was obviously the challenging issues around landlords taking advantage and carving up their properties into becoming sort of ridiculous sized in terms of the number of people that they were cramming in there at that point. Environmental Health have done a lot of work on that, and the housing team have looked at Shirebrook especially, but also the wider areas. And it's the work we've done, it was kind of felt that there wasn't really the need at this point now for selective licensing. It's administratively very burdensome. It's very difficult to do, and also you need some specific reasons and rationale behind doing it. And at this point, because of the intensive work the partnership team, Environmental Health, have done in Shirebrook especially, almost that's kind of resolved itself in some respects. I mean, resolved itself through the council's enforcement and actions and the work that they've done. And we're also doing an NG20 specific landlords event, and so it feels like selective licensing at one point was appropriate, but possibly not so much now. So that's kind of why we haven't really looked into it, because it's been sort of looked at, discounted in the past, and there hasn't, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, because obviously your patch is better than I do, certainly, but I don't know if there's any other parts of the district where there is a big issue in terms of the private rented sector and landlords behaving inappropriately. I mean, we know there's one or two landlords who aren't the best, but that wouldn't be picked up through selective licensing. That's us having to work closer with the enforcement team on those specific landlords because they have the property dispersed across the district. So that's the kind of the thing I'd say around selective licensing. So unless you tell us that there's a specific issue in a certain area, we've kind of already done that investigation and discounted it as probably not required at this point. And so Tom can probably pick up the other parts. But yeah, if anybody, by all means, email us if you think there's sort of wrong on that point, or you think there's a specific couple of streets that are a real challenge, and we can look at it with environmental health, certainly.
Thank you for that. Is there any more questions at all?
You want me to pick up those last
Yeah,
two
if you
questions?
could, Tom.
No.
Yeah, please.
No problem. In terms of member involvement, that's something that I'd be really keen work on. One piece of work that I'm doing at the moment is to split empty properties down by ward, and then circulate this out to councillors, so you can check those properties. So in a way, that's going to that will at least make members aware of what properties are empty on their patch. If members can think of any other way that they would like to be involved, I'm always happy to talk to them. That's something that I would always encourage. In terms of the enforcement question, all the powers are listed. All the powers are listed in the strategy. The only thing that I haven't mentioned is that if an empty property has a mortgage on it, you can, if it's causing a problem, what we have done on a few occasions in the past is to write to the mortgage company to get that detail off the land registry. And sometimes, not always, the mortgage company will urge the owner, to take action, because dependent on the type of mortgage, they might be in breach. The very fact that they're not living there can sometimes mean that they're in breach of their mortgage agreement. So I'm glad that you raised that, because I'll add that on to the enforcement matrix that we've done on the strategy. But yeah, that as far as I'm aware, that's the only other tool that we've got in the enforcement section.
Jeff, if I can just come back, I just want to be clear. So we're going to send the empty properties by ward. Tom wasn't suggesting that you need to go and check them. That's not what we're saying. It was just making you aware of them. So it might be that you weren't aware that a particular property was empty or anything like that, or it might have been a magnet for ASB in the past and you weren't sure why. It gives you a better understanding of the empty properties in your patch, and also the scale of the problem, I suppose, as well. But we're not expecting you to check it. And I'm sure, obviously, that's not what Tom meant.
No, apologies if apologies if you thought I was putting work on, not at all. Sorry.
It's just to make you aware of what the issues are within your particular area.
Yeah, well, I would say that would be informative and of interest and good knowledge to have had. So look forward to receiving that. Right, have we finished there then, Joanne?
Yes, Chair, I think that covers the issues, and I think it's quite useful to hear that selective licensing maybe isn't appropriate at this stage, because that was something that you'd kind of got on a kind of leftover list, if you like, from the work that you've been doing. So I think it's good to discount that at this stage and know that's not something that we need to follow up on. So I think it is just back to moving the recommendation, Chair. Which is
sorry, Chair. Councillor Peake in the chamber would like to speak, please.
Sorry, no worries.
Yeah, Councillor Peake, would you like to come in?
Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, what I would like also, which I meant to say previously, when I ride round my patch, I always look, and if I feel that there is a property what's empty, I do get in touch with the appropriate officer who will check that out. So I'm sure, all members could, keep the eyes and ears open and look for that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. Right, Joanne, we're back to you.
Sorry, Chair. Yes. So back to your notes. It's just to move the recommendation on page 138.
Right. Thank you for your presentation. And it concludes members' discussion, and I would like to move the recommendations at point 6 within the report on page 138 of the papers. Can I have a seconder, please?
Yeah, Councillor Adams, Chair.
Thank you. Could I ask for a show of hands of all in favour?
Yeah, that's unanimous, Chair.
Right, thank you for that. And once again, thank you, both of you, Thomas and Carl, for coming and giving your presentations. You are now you are now free to leave the meeting.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Bye. Right. Joanne?
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Peake's just leaving the chamber, so I'll give her 2 minutes to. Okay.
Yeah, that's no problem. We're now moving to item 8, I believe, and
yes,
we shall now consider our work programme for the coming year. If I could pass over to our scrutiny officer, please. Joanne?
Thank you, Chair. Members will be aware we've got an informal meeting following the session today, where we were just going to do some work on our next review. I just need to let members know that the session we had planned for the 18th of November at the moment cannot go ahead as a formal public meeting due to some resourcing issues that we currently have. We aren't actually running a number of the main committee meetings in November at this stage. So we do need to take a decision as to whether we move the items onto the December agenda, or whether you would like to do any initial work in an informal session. What I am conscious of is in terms of items, we'd got Carl and Tom attending again in terms of the other strategy which they are working on, which is the housing strategy. That does need to come to committee. You may be happy to do that in an informal session so that it doesn't delay the strategy moving forward further, and I can double check with them what sort of impact it would be if we were to delay that to December. You would also planned to start gathering your evidence in relation to the review of our work with Robert Woodhead. We can run some of that in an informal session if you'd like that to go ahead, or we can move those items to December, where we have got capacity to accommodate some further items. Given what we've just heard now, we'd provisionally got an item around private rented sector for December, which was to follow up on some of that activity from earlier in the year. But having heard what Carl said in relation to selective licensing, which was one of the main areas that you still wanted to follow up on, I think that item's probably not needed at this point in time, particularly as we've just heard about the empty property strategy as well. So we have got capacity in December to accommodate that. The other meetings during the year are predominantly linked back to performance reports and the information we have in terms of the wider growth indicators. So it's really just to take a decision as to how you'd like to move forward with those items originally planned for November at this stage.
Thank you. Can I ask members for their opinions, please? Shall we move it all to December agenda? Anybody want to say anything? Tom, would you like to come in? Oh, and then David.
If there are technical issues or reasons why we can't manage it in November, then it makes sense, Chair, to move it to December. However, as this morning's clearly this session, even though I've not participated, your session has already lasted for nearly 2 hours. I would like to make a plea that if we do move it to December, we either have a separate informal meeting in December to work through this, or the formal section is kept to an absolute minimum length to allow members of the Gross Scrutiny Committee to get on with what it was they want to work on. So that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
But if necessary, I'm happy to move that we move it to a December meeting, but I'd like some assurance, if possible, from Joanne that we're either going to have a separate informal meeting in December if there's already items on the December agenda, because otherwise you become fairly ineffective after 1 hour 50 minutes. And I would suggest that if we're going to start going to informal now, we ain't going to achieve very much.
No, that's not an issue. We can look at an alternative date and time. We don't need to do it on the same day if it's, I mean, it would potentially be a little bit lengthy. We've already got Q2 performance scheduled. I can double check with Carl and Tom in relation to the strategy item as to whether they are still on track for November and whether they can accommodate a different date. So then the only other element there is you starting to gather information in relation to the new review. Now, you don't have to do that in public session. You can do that in public or informal. There's no tie to that. So I can schedule an informal meeting to suit members essentially anytime from here on in for that review, if you prefer that.
Yeah. Anybody else? Yes, come in, David.
Yeah, I was actually, Tom took the words out of my mouth, really. I was going to say the same thing. You know, otherwise it's, you know, again, you look at today's session, it's just going to pile up. So, yeah, I'm okay.
Yeah, I can look at that. I can send some dates out to members. That's not an issue.
Yeah, are you all right with that then, Joanne? So to get that sorted.
I'll double check with Carl and Tom. If there is a particular issue from the strategies point of view, I will come back to members and let you know whether we need to keep that date so that we don't delay their strategy in any way. But that will then literally just be for that item, and I'll keep it brief for you.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Fine. Yep. So where we're moving to next?
It's just to move the recommendations of the report, Chair, on page 161.
Right. Have we got a proposer?
Yeah, I'll propose it.
Right. Thank you, David Dixon. Derek, are you going to second it?
Yes, I'll second that.
Eric Adams. All in favour, could we have a show of hands, please?
Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Right. Where are we now? Are we?
Close the meeting, Chair. You just at the you're at the end of page 7 on your notes.
Can I thank? Is it that?
Yeah.
0.61. Or can I thank members and officers for their attendance today? That now concludes the business of the meeting, and I shall close the meeting and ask for the live stream to be ended to the public with us on YouTube. Thank you for watching.